what do you do when you're in a position where you've come to the end of the road in this relationship? And I had this one employee when I was working in the tower company, when we had to let him go. And my heart is so much to see people succeed. My heart is so much to wanting to serve them and help them, push them up. And when you know that you've come to this intersection where it's on a repeated occasion, this behavior's not changing, or this cooperation's not happening, and it comes to a necessary ending. I think the leadership needs to change in that moment too, because when I walked into the room, and I remember this so clearly, and I felt like, and I was just like, oh Lord, my heart is just so gripped with, sadness, because, I feel like I'm going to hurt this person. And immediately I heard the Lord say to me, he said, if you're going in for an operation where the surgeon's going to hurt you, do you want him to have a dull knife or a sharp knife? And I was like, I'll take the sharp knife. It does less damage.
Wow.
And so when I went in, I felt like it was just be really clear.
Hey, everyone. Welcome again to another Supernatural Leadership Podcast episode. My name is Sean Gaby. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we're just so enjoying hearing all the feedback of how people are experiencing the supernatural in their leadership every day. And so remember, we believe that everybody out there has a leader within. So let's make that leader a little more supernatural. As you know, we've been bringing on so many amazing guests over the years, and we continue to do that. We love it. But don't forget to please rate, review, subscribe if you haven't already. Share these episodes with all these amazing people. I just think that these conversations need to spread out there and impact more leaders. So you're a part of helping us do that by sharing, rating, reviewing, subscribing. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our new Supernatural Leadership YouTube channel. Please really help us grow that channel as we continue to add videos from even previous interviews that we've never shown before onto that channel. And so today we have an amazing, amazing guest with us, friend of mine, someone that I've known for quite some time. I would say probably almost 2 decades now, somewhere in there, maybe 18 years actually, to be exact. Before I bring him on, I'm gonna read a little bit about him, a little bit about his bio to introduce who he is. His name is Trevor Biehn, and he hails all the way from Stratford, Ontario, Canada. He is a Canadian brother of mine, and so I'm going to read his bio to give you a little bit of an introduction. Then we're going to dive into today's episode. Trevor and Leslie Biehn are the lead pastors of Jubilee Stratford. They are passionate about the presence of God and the kingdom of heaven expanding, as well as raising up and equipping people in their callings. They have a heart to connect people with Jesus through evangelism and the end time harvest. The Biehns have been married for 27 years, and get this, they have seven folks. Seven. Should I say it again for those in the back? 7 amazing children. Wild. Trevor, welcome to the Supernatural Leadership Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Sean, for having me. It's a privilege to be here with you.
Man, so, we've known each other now for quite some time. I think we met way back in, I want to say
2006.
No, I think it was 2004, wasn't it?
Was it?
Now that I think about it,
2004. You're right.
I think it was 2004. So it has been 2 decades, basically.
It has been 2 decades.
That's wild. And I met you. I remember you had the soul patch.
Yes.
Soul patch, little beard thing here.
Yeah.
You had the horseshoe. You had the horseshoe gauged earrings. You remember that? You remember that?
Oh yeah.
You were a musician. I was a musician. I had the dreadlocks back then as well. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but we met because I went to this event that your church was hosting.
Yes.
Stacy Campbell.
Yes. It was a prophetic school, and Patricia Bootsma.
Yes. Yeah. And we did some outreach on the street, and I remember seeing amazing things on that outreach back in 2004, and really stuck with me, that I've shared over the years all over around the world, actually, things that happened to me on that event.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a real cutting edge time, definitely, for the prophetic and the supernatural, just erupting in people's lives and becoming so evident.
It was because it was like so less saturated back then. There was no YouTube.
No.
Like barely Google, like Yeah, I think in Napster and Kazaa were like the thing. Maybe they were already phased out at that point. I don't remember now, but
Yeah,
like there wasn't a lot of access to this stuff. So you had to actually go places. You had
yeah,
to
true.
travel. You had to go to a school in person. There
Yeah,
wasn't a lot of online stuff available. And if there was, maybe it was like on an old cassette tape, a
yeah.
Graham Cook cassette tape or like a VHS tape from David Hogan that you had to find and scrummage through, or like the Brownsville revival tapes. Like you had to actually work hard to get resource back then,
It's
right?
true. Yeah. No, it's so true. And I just remember so many youth and young adults being so hungry for it, and being so brave and courageous and bold just to step out with it. And we have some amazing stories of, people that would go out to McDonald's or to Tim Hortons, and they just have these divine appointments where God would just intervene in just a split moment. And we'd see signs, wonders, and miracles breaking out. Just, yeah, just absolutely phenomenal time period. And just it was so great, when we head to school, and to have you come, Sean, it was so much fun. And we were
It
jamming
was,
together, and you
yeah,
on
we did.
drums and I'm on guitar.
Yeah, yeah, we did, man. And I remember like, yeah, I loved what you guys had fostered there. It was so like so supernatural. There was so much prophetic stuff that happened. I remember in that time frame on the street and at that event. And I have very significant memories of specific words that God spoke to me actually
Mm,
there that I
mm.
still share to this day. In fact, I just shared recently somewhere, probably at my own church. But when I was there with you, you weren't the lead pastor of the church at the time.
No, I wasn't. No.
You were very involved. And just give us a little bit of a Coles Notes version of like your church, from what I understand, is sort of the starting point to what we now know as Catch the Fire, in a
Yes, that's correct.
sense,
Yes.
right? Explain
Yeah.
explain that.
Yeah. In 1981, John and Carol, they started to minister in the streets of Stratford, and a lot of youth, unsaved youth, started to come to the Lord, and the church was birthed. And then in 1992, they left for Toronto, and that's when I moved in. So we actually just did this cross. We missed each other, and then I was 18 at the time. And I was just coming from the farm, grew up just north of Stratford, and worked for my father for many years. And then I moved into the city after getting married and working in a music store, music retail store. So when we connected, I was actually working in the music retail store, and I was also involved with the worship here at the church. And in that time, I look back at it with such fond memory, because it was really the place that I felt like the Lord was stretching and molding me in this area of leadership. I learned really great work ethics on the farm. I understood, probably the biggest concept about farm work is when it's harvest time, you work. And when it's not harvest time, you get back into the rhythm of, your daily schedule. And harvest time was always so much fun, because I mean, we'd start so early in the morning, and we just push all the way to the wee hours of the night. And then you come away from it, and there's so much joy and so much excitement about the progress that's taking place. And so I carried a lot of those attributes into my workplace in the music store. And I started off super green, not understanding how to interact with customers, how to do sales. And because of the work ethic and serving the customers, I became the manager of the store within a couple of years. And as I managed it, that's where I remember district manager coming to me and saying to me that all the work ethics that you've learned that has elevated you in serving the company, serving people, you're now going to have to pivot in your leadership, because it's no longer about you. It's now about the people that you're going to develop and invest into. And that was a real mark for me to understand that as I'm growing in this, there's a pivot point in which we have to shift to where now our gaze and our investment is in others. And so I'm hoping that we can hit that today, in this conversation, because I think true leadership is when we start to invest outside of ourselves.
Yeah, that's so good. Absolutely. And that's, I always often say leadership is like a hose. You're continually giving out. Yes, you receive, but leadership feels often like you're just constantly giving. You're investing in other people. And of course, it's supposed to be reciprocated, and we need to receive from God. We need to receive from others as well, and be a bucket sometimes. But sometimes there's seasons where it just feels like we've been a host for a long time.
Yeah, it's
And
so
that's
true.
that's part of the journey, the ebbs and flows of leadership. But just to get back to something before we get into that, so your church that you now are the lead pastor of, that you were not
Yes.
leading when I met you, really is the starting point for John and Carol Arnott. For those of you who don't know, who were sort of the catalysts to lead a great revival / renewal that took place at what most people know as the Airport Church in Toronto, the Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship, that now is all branded as Catch the Fire, right? Correct me if I'm
Yes.
wrong.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
that started in 1994.
Yeah. The outpouring was in January 20th, 1994.
94, and it swept the world, and so much good came out of it. And so you're pastoring the church that I would consider as the seedbed for that. And so really this is a supernatural move of God, and this
Yeah.
is a supernatural leadership podcast.
Yes.
And I want to get into a little bit before we dive into some of the content here. Give us a Coles Notes version. Like, I mean, you
Yeah.
were a farmer. You came at
Yeah.
18. Like, were you already in that space? Like, you're coming into a culture that maybe is introducing you to the supernatural for the first time, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe you came from something like that. What's your
Yeah.
supernatural leadership journey like? Or what was it
Yeah.
like?
With growing up on the farm, I mean, there was many times that I would spend hours in the fields. And when I was in the fields, I always had this hunger, this desire for there's got to be something more in my journey with the Lord. So I grew up in a Mennonite community, not horse and buggy Mennonite, but it was modern Mennonite. And faith was very much real part of our family, part of our culture. And it was at 18 when I decided that I wanted to go and serve at some kind of youth center, for street kids, those that are, and so I came to Stratford. It was called the Bunker at the time, and a lot of the volunteers were from Jubilee, this church, and they invited me out to a Friday night service with Mark DuPont, and they said he's a prophet. You got to come check him out, and I was like, a prophet? I've never heard or seen a prophet before. And I remember being at that service when Mark would begin to minister. It was very interesting because you could tell that he was definitely reaching into or operating or responding to or interacting with the spiritual realm. It was a realm beyond the realm of our understanding. And when he would pray for people, there would be legitimate power released, and there would be healings, and people would be changed, and they would experience it. And the thing that I loved about Mark was he didn't carry any hype. It was either legit or it wasn't legit, and
Right.
it was just so raw and so real. And so that awakened me to the spirit realm and the realm in which we can access as part of God's kingdom in our everyday life, and the tools and the resources that are available. And so from there, that's where I left our Mennonite community and came to Jubilee. And the one thing that I loved about Jubilee was that it was a church where people weren't afraid to be messy. Where I came from, it was about what's on the exterior, putting up a good front. Here at Jubilee, it was about what's on the inside and the raw, and let's get into the mess. Let's get into what's happening with life's hurts, life's pains, life's trials, and then find a God of forgiveness and a God of healing to restore and transform our lives into something that's absolutely beautiful, with tons of potential ahead. And so from there, I started to attend Jubilee, was a part of their youth ministry, and then became part of their worship ministry. And then it was 8 years ago that the Lord pulled me out of, or called me out of, the marketplace, because I was working in music retail, and then for 10 years. And then I came out of music retail and worked for my father-in-law in a cell phone tower company, construction company. I was a construction manager and a project manager, and then did that for 10 years. And then the Lord called me to be a pastor at Jubilee. And pastoring at Jubilee really was not on my radar. It wasn't something that I was ambitious about, or something that I even, if you would have asked me 10 years ago that, would you be the pastor at Jubilee? It wouldn't have been something, but it was literally the Lord said, I want you to lead this, and I'm calling you to it. And he opened the door and provided a way for it.
Wow. I remember a little bit of that transition. I mean, you and I had talked, I think, around that time quite a bit. I remember like that what was happening in your life, in your world, even though maybe at times we hadn't chatted in a while. I remember hearing a little bit of those updates, and it's awesome to see. And I know that man, like you're a busy man, like 7 kids. Like
Yeah.
what kind of car do you drive? Like
A Honda,
how
Honda
do you
Odyssey with lots of seats.
okay. But even the Odyssey, isn't it like
Yeah.
it's like 7, 8 seats max, isn't it?
Eight seats, but once they start turning 16, they don't want to ride with you anyway.
Yeah, that's
So
true. That's
they have their
true.
own vehicle. So
I have a friend who has I think 7 kids too, and he bought one of those commercial Mercedes like work
yes, yeah,
work trucks, work vans, you know, those big
yeah,
high because it's like a shuttle bus basically. You
totally.
can
Yeah.
fit like they can fit 9, I think, in that
Is it
thing.
like a Sprinter?
I don't know. It's just one of those
Yeah,
ones you see that all those work like those Mercedes
yeah,
Benz like work trucks,
yeah.
you
I
know,
think
those
it's
big
called
tall.
Sprinter. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
I
Yeah.
thought for sure you would have had one of those, but yeah, I know your oldest is older now and driving, and most of your kids are. I think 3 of your oldest kids are probably driving by now, right? At
Yeah, I
least.
got to ride in a Sprinter once. It was in Hollywood in Justin Bieber Sprinter when we were visiting him in downtown, and that
Okay.
was a nice one. I could have asked him for that for our family, but
Okay. Yeah.
I don't
Well, you
think he
should
would
have.
have given it to
Yeah,
us.
you missed your chance. Hey, so let's get back to this. You know you've been leading supernaturally for years and years and years, and you mentioned something to me earlier about what I feel like probably is what God is, well, because you kind of mentioned it, like God is speaking to you in the season about how to develop healthier supernatural leadership,
Hmm.
and this whole concept around judgment, understanding judgment and discernment. Can you
Yes.
let's elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Judgment and discernment, I think, are key tools that a leader needs to use, and I think if they're done well, meaning that you're using a supernatural gift within yourself to exercise discernment and judgment, it can have a really good outcome. One thing that I've learned in leadership that's consistent between, whether I was working in the music store, in business, or in construction, is that there's always people that you have the opportunity to invest into. I think good leadership is about servanthood. And so when you're serving somebody, if you have eyes to see, which means that you can see their potential and see how they're designed, the uniqueness of their design, and if you can see their future or the potential future, and if they recognize that they have that potential future and have a passion for it, imposing a future on somebody never works. But if you
Right.
see it and you engage with them and their passion ignites with that, then you carry a key element in their journey of development. And so that I consider that to be a form of discernment, where you're discerning and you're assessing, and as they grow and develop, there can be all sorts of different kind of opportunities or challenges or trials that they need to overcome in their own personal development, and that's where judgment comes in, and I would say judgment is the strategy on how you exercise your discernment.
Mm,
And judgment
interesting.
and judgment really requires tempo, is really important. I've often found with people in conflict, because sometimes, in leadership, actually, oftentimes, when you engage with people, there's an element of conflict that's involved with it. Meaning, like, there can be resistance to your leadership. And when that conflict takes place, most of us don't wake up in the morning and saying, "Hey, how much conflict can I face today? I'm really looking forward to all the conflict I can find."
Right, right.
And we're usually wired two different ways with conflict. Either we're too assertive and we want to be the dominant aggressor, or we're passive and we tend to not exercise quick enough. And both of those have poor outcomes for the individual we're serving.
Mm,
Both of those can be very harmful. And so I say that with discernment and judgment, the strategy, we need to know the tempo in which we can exercise that judgment for a good outcome.
that's
But
good.
there's always a variable that's involved too, because when we exercise the judgment, it always puts an individual into a position of where they can choose one way or the other way. And my hope and goal is that if people don't receive the wisdom I carry or receive the leadership that I have for them to serve with, maybe I'm not the right leader for them. And that's okay. Maybe they need to find somebody else to follow, or and that's a place of discernment as well. And it's also good for me too, because there's no use me leading people that don't want to be led and by me. And so I want to be surrounded by people that are going to be able to glean from what I have to offer and be able to respond to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think those two words carry so much potency for all of us as leaders. If you're in business listening to this, like, this applies to you. If you're in some sort of vocational ministry, this applies to you. If you're whatever career job you find yourself at, even leading and parenting kids, like, I mean, you
100%.
need to understand this, especially on a discernment level, like to discern what's going on in your people, in your kids, in your leadership team, and to know how to act. I love how you kind of word that. You word judgment is the strategy. Correct me if I'm wrong, in acting on your discernment.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you, so like, tell me like how that plays out in your everyday now. Like, do you find, yeah, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about parenting for a minute, because I don't know about you, but I've found parenting is like a moving target. Like here you have an individual that comes to this world that's completely dependent upon you for everything. I mean, their very life and survival. They spend 20 years with you, and the end game goal is that they're completely released from you and into independence. And there's all sorts of stages in between. And what I've found in my leadership, when you have somebody who's completely dependent on you, that type of leadership, that type of discernment, and that type of strategy or judgment is very different from the discernment that takes place with the 20-year-old and the type of leadership that you're going to carry. And I think a lot of times where parents get it wrong, especially right around the 12 to 13-year age, when that child is starting to exercise their own identity, and where they're in a place now of where they're starting to make their own choices. And of course, to us, those choices look absolutely stupid, and they look like you're going to make the biggest mistake ever. And they don't want to listen to us at all because they want to learn on their own. Your leadership has to shift. It has to mold all the way through. And I think that concept applies to business, church, regardless, because in our church community, maybe we don't have people who are, they're very dependent in their stage of life. And then you have other people who are very independent in their stage of life, and your approach has to be totally different. And so I think sometimes we think in our leadership, we're very static, that it's a bunch of formulas, and our formulas have to be the same. I would suggest that our leadership has to be very fluid. It has to be able to adjust to who that person is and what stage of development they're in, for us to exercise discernment and judgment. And let me just make it really practical for one moment. So like when my children started to hit their teenage years, and they started to make choices that, I think are not good choices for the long-term vision of their life. When they're in that stage, they're not thinking about the long-term vision of their life. They're thinking about, things that are important to them. If I discern, okay, there's a poor decision being made, right? And if the judgment that I make is, well, I got to go in as a father, and I've got to flex my father muscle, and I've got to put in the boundaries, and I've got to put restrictions into place to prevent them from making those choices, well, I'm just going to push them away. And but if I come in with an approach of, my discernment is, this is a really poor choice. It's going to make a mess. But if I come in as a coach and as a sideline, I'm available. I'm connected with you. I'm your greatest fan. I'm cheering for you. I've learned that the connection. So the discernment is poor choice. Discernment is connection is my strength. So my leadership of dominance and restriction is going to have a poor outcome. My connection is, oh, I'm there for you when you make that mistake. As you clean up that mess, I'm going to help you, and I'm still there. I'm still your friend.
Right. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And hearing you talk, I mean, I have 4 kids myself, and my kids are relatively younger than your kids, at least your oldest kids. Um, I still have a 7-year old, almost 7, anyways. But yeah, I'm noticing the shift because now my kids are moving into their teenage years, and I'm noticing the shift. And everything you're saying is hitting home because my discernment and my strategy I've noticed is shifting and changing.
Yes.
But there's sometimes part of me that doesn't want to change with it maybe as quick as I need to,
Yeah.
under the guise of trying to protect and
Right.
safeguard what I feel like could be a disaster. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes.
And so like even more, I mean, parenting is a really hard leadership life. I mean, I think
It,
some of the hardest leadership lessons are learned in parenting,
yes.
because there's just so much more vulnerable emotion involved,
Yeah.
so much more care involved. It's 24-hour, 24/7. It's nonstop. Whereas everything else in life, often there's breaks and there's pauses and, there's vacations and there's moments where you're not necessarily the leader in action all the time, whether it's your career, you go away for a little bit, you're not necessarily thinking of your leadership, so to speak. But with parenting, it's nonstop.
Yeah.
And but I really sense like that we need to be, as supernatural leaders, this is the premise of our podcast, continually more presence based and
Hmm.
not just principle based.
Yes.
Jesus was a presence led leader who operated within principle. He wasn't a principle led leader that sometimes was led by the presence. John 5:19 says he only does or did what he saw his father doing, that it was his spiritual nourishment to do. In John 6, the will of him who sent him, which was the Father. So the way he got his nourishment, the way he got his leadership was by following the presence of God. And then within that, of course, there was principles at play. But if we don't have presence and we only have principles, that's where we miss it a lot in leadership.
Yeah. I agree.
Right? If we're not discerning by presence where things are at with specific individuals, whether it's in our parenting, our, church leadership, our business leadership, our careers, our as we're managing projects and events with our team members or whatever the case may be for you, if you're not discerning presence led and you're
Yeah.
just simply operating in principle, you might miss it quite a bit.
Yes.
You might
Yeah.
fail quite a bit because you might not be giving the people what they need. Because as you said it's like everyone needs something different at different stages.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think one of the challenges too with present led leadership in your discernment is, what do you do when you're in a position where you've come to the end of the road in this relationship? And I had this one employee when I was working in the tower company, when we had to let him go. And my heart is so much to see people succeed. My heart is so much to wanting to serve them and help them, push them up. And when you know that you've come to this intersection where it's on a repeated occasion, this behavior's not changing, or this cooperation's not happening, and it comes to a necessary ending. I think the leadership needs to change in that moment too, because when I walked into the room, and I remember this so clearly, and I felt like, and I was just like, oh Lord, my heart is just so gripped with, sadness, because, I feel like I'm going to hurt this person. And immediately I heard the Lord say to me, he said, if you're going in for an operation where the surgeon's going to hurt you, do you want him to have a dull knife or a sharp knife? And I was like, I'll take the sharp knife. It does less damage.
Wow.
And so when I went in, I felt like it was just be really clear and be really precise as to
Wow.
why this is happening, and bring it to an end. And
Wow.
by doing that, all of a sudden, what realized for me was, I made every attempt I could make to help this individual succeed. They've made their own choice. Now it's come to a point that the pain that I've inflicted onto them, they're going to walk out the door, and the first thing they're going to do is start reflecting on, what could I have done differently? And that was the best thing for them, because when they step into the next opportunity with another leader, hopefully whatever that was will have shifted or changed. And so that was a major life lesson for me, because I love using soft skills, but there's hard skills in leadership. And I think that as we discern, as we use our judgment and strategy, that there has to be an element of where we're walking in connection with the Lord, where we hear his voice, and that way we can exercise it with precision and with accuracy. Because there's nothing like going to a good surgeon. They know what they're doing, they do it well, and then there's a recovery and you're back into action. And so we as leaders want to rise to that place of where we're really helping and serving people.
Well, I think the word of God is like that. I think of, as you're talking, like Hebrews 4:12, the word of God is so living and powerful that it's sharp. The word says it's sharp,
Yes.
sharper than a double-edged sword, and it divides soul and spirit. It's a discerner. Like the word of God is connected directly. I just think about what you're saying, the discernment, the sharpness is connected. It's a discerner of the thoughts and hearts of men, the thoughts and intents of the heart. Like the word of God is sharp. And so if we are representing the word himself, Mr. Word himself, Jesus, if we are representing Mr. Discerner himself, then there is going to be, and there needs to be, a sharpness, not in an abrasive way, not in a violent or aggressive way, but in a way that's not going to beat around the bush, in a way that's not going to use, like, who wants to be circumcised with a dull flint knife? Like, I'm sorry,
No kidding.
I don't know. I think about Joshua. I think about them crossing over, and before they kind of went in, they like circumcised the generation that had never been circumcised. I'm like, was that like a flint sharpening guy on standby? Because by the time they got through all those people, man, like, I don't know, but someone's screaming for sure. But no one wants to be led with a dull knife, if you can use that. No one wants to be led with a dull sort of expression of discernment. You call it judgment. If the strategy behind how the discernment plays out, it's called the expression of our discernment. No one wants that to be dull. It just hurts. Like you said, it's going to hurt even longer. Like, I'd rather rip my youngest daughter had a Band-Aid recently on, and she's only 6, turning 7. And she was trying to pull it off slowly, like feeling the pain. And I was like trying to get my hand in there. I'm just going to yank it. I wasn't even going to tell her, just pulling it off slowly. So I just went in, I just yanked it. And it's like, at first she was like shocked, but she's like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And sometimes that's how it needs to be in leadership. That's how it has to be with our employees. That's how it has to be. We need to not beat around the bush, use discernment, act in healthy judgment, and cut where things need to be cut. So it's a clean cut. Because if you think about this, if you cut a loaf of bread sometimes with a dull knife, and or the wrong knife, it's like the bread gets squished, it gets mangled. But when you cut it with a sharp knife, it's clean.
It's so true. It's just even listening to you talk, I'm thinking of different scenarios where I was late to the game. Like I prolonged that necessary discussion that would have brought harm, or would have brought pain, I should say, not harm. It would have brought pain. But that pain isn't bad. It's pain for growth. It's pain for development. It's necessary pain. As a father, one of my goals as a father was to be the perfect father. And I remember the first time that I made a mistake with my daughter, and it just shattered my whole world. It's just like, oh my goodness, like, here I am trying to be the perfect father, and it's impossible. And so part of me, I got delivered and freed from the expectation of perfection. And I think that sometimes we can have so much pressure on us that we have to be perfect in our leadership, that there is no room for mistake and error. And when I say this, I don't mean this as, we have a license to make mistakes and hurt tons of people. What I'm meaning is like, when we need to give ourselves a break, in the sense of saying there is grace for us to navigate through this leadership. And when we make mistakes, own those mistakes, but let's do our best at being able to, exercise judgment, exercise discernment with clarity and truth. It doesn't require loud expression or yell. It doesn't require like a dominant positioning. It just means a firm clarity that brings life, and that's the goal.
That is the goal. And I appreciate all that you're saying, because I just feel like it's so needed. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that sharpness, that illustration that you shared, that God showed you regarding, would you rather the dull knife, or the, if you were getting surgery, or the sharp knife. I just think this is such a key word for leaders
Yeah.
in this time, especially in a day of an age where everyone tries to be politically correct.
Right.
Everyone is afraid of HR coming after them because they did the thing the wrong way. They said the wrong word. They didn't use the right terminology. They weren't sensitive enough. Like, there's so much fear mongering now out there in culture because of our
Yeah.
social sort of situation, our social, the social that's happening right now. The culture is just, it's upside down in so many ways, and there's just so much fear of just saying it the way that it is. And I
Hmm.
just think that makes sometimes the best leaders. Yes, there can be a compromise of compassion. Sometimes there can be an out of balance, and it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it. We get that.
Yeah.
And not to be abrasive, and not to be overly aggressive, and not to try to divide on purpose. But the reality of it is, when you do say the truth, when you do say the right thing, sometimes even the right way, with sharpness, it's
Yes.
still going to create potentially problems.
Yeah.
So whether you try to skirt around the issue and appease everybody, there's going to be problems. And whether you say the right thing the right way and do it, it's just clean, it's cut, there's also going to be potential problems. I think that at the end of the day, as long as we are guilt free in our conscience that we did the thing the way that we knew in our own conviction that we were to do, if we do that and we live from that, it will all be good in the end.
Absolutely. And I think one of the greatest attributes in leadership development is being open to our blind spots, and
That's
allowing
good.
allowing see, we can be blind to discernment, and we can be blind to judgment of our own lives, and sometimes we're afraid to look in the mirror and look into, allow the Lord to examine us, or even the people closest to us, that can, and if we're willing to not necessarily invest all our energy into our weaknesses, because I do believe you have to play to your strengths. However, I do think there needs to be an awareness, just like Paul said, I had this thorn in the side of my flesh, and it was a pain for it to be there, but it brought for me a dependency on God, a dependency on who God is, and I think that all of us have a cross to bear. I think all of us have blind spots, and I think that we need to be open to seeing in the reflection of what is the discernment of what's happening for me, and what is the strategy on how I can then exercise my weaknesses and my strengths that best serve other people, because it's really about the development of those that have been entrusted for us to care for.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. What do you think some are some real potential practical ways, from everything we've talked about today, that the listeners can kind of take home, and how can they apply some of the stuff that we've talked about today? What are some of the things that stand out to you, and give us some sort of like a
Yeah, I think,
activation.
yeah, the activation I would recommend, if someone was sitting with me, is pull out a piece of paper and then make a list of all the different names and relationships that you interact with, at what level of relationship. So if it's a child, your leadership is going to be at this specific level if they're in a dependent stage. If it's a teenager, that your leadership is going to be at this level. If they're in an independent, they're going to be at this level. If it's an employee that you have that, and you're the employer, that relationship is going to be different. And I think just take every name down and then sit down and then ask yourself the question: am I being truthful, and am I being honest in my leadership with these individuals? Am I presenting what I'm seeing with my discernment? And is there a strategy for that discernment? Am I exercising it? Because I think most of the time we tend to ignore, well, I think we tend to ignore discernment,
Yeah.
We see things, and because it's inconvenient, we ignore it.
Yeah.
And then I think we tend to shy away from the strategy on exercise. And so if you take a list of all the people and just go through them one at a time, and even just when you're praying for them, or if you're just meditating on that relationship, I would encourage you to ask those key questions. What am I seeing and what am I doing about it? And then make a couple little steps, make some goals for yourself. It doesn't have to be today. You don't want to knock it all off in one day, but make it over like a course of a week, or 2 weeks, and then activate that one goal, and then evaluate.
That's
You
good.
know, I've engaged, and see what the results are.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things I just think about that's often a stumbling block is that people let fear govern their discernment
Totally.
and almost shroud their discernment, so they don't act. They can't make a right judgment. They don't act. They don't have the strategy. They can't be strategic in how they express that discernment because there's so much fear shrouding their discernment that they can't confront or deal with the thing that they're discerning. That's a
Mm-hmm.
dangerous way to live as a leader. It's like the ostrich syndrome. It's like if we just put our head in the sand long enough, the problems will go away. No, your discernment's never going to go away.
No.
You
Yeah.
might suppress the pain, the feeling, do whatever you can, but it's still going to be there. It's still going to come up. It's still going to manifest itself in some way to get your attention. Eventually, you're going to have to deal. And so my encouragement is to, even in this activation as well, is to say, God, like, where have I let my fear shroud my discernment to paralyze me before I even start,
So
before I
Sean,
even move
just as
ahead?
you're saying this, I'm seeing such clarity. Like if fear is governing, which I think we're all kind of somewhat guilty of, if fear is governing, what's happening is there's a level of anxiety and there's a level of stress that you're carrying that you're not supposed to be carrying as a leader. And it's actually making you an ineffective leader. See, for every area that we have a discernment and a strategy that we don't exercise, it means we're in compromise. And when we're in compromise, we're usually compromising something from ourselves. We're
Wow.
compromising something from our team. We're compromising something for the community we're serving. And for us to come out from underneath that compromise and to come out from underneath the anxiety and the fear, it's going to be proactive with intentionality that says we must exercise discernment and judgment with clarity. And we don't always get it right, but the weight will become lighter. And will become more efficient and more effective. And it'll actually get easier with better results.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I hope that really spoke to some of you out there listening and really believing that your leadership is going to go to the next level in this season of just acting on your discernment, expressing the strategy, which is the judgment, to see clean cuts take place in this next season. No more dull slicing and dicing. This is a season of clean cutting, a season of moving ahead, season of cutting and pioneering the way ahead. And you need a sharp knife, a sharp machete to pioneer the way ahead against all the things that get in your way. So my encouragement, do the activation, get plugged into this. And Trevor, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time with us today on today's episode. Love to have you back, dive into some prophetic stuff next time. You're an amazing, amazing leader. So thankful again I've been able to know you this long. And just quickly tell us how we can follow you, how we can stay in touch with you. And by the way, all the info for all of what he's going to say is going to be in the description, but I want you to all hear it from him.
Absolutely. Our probably our strongest platform right now is on our YouTube channel, which is Jubilee Stratford. You can find us on there. We have a lot of different content that we do with our music and spoken word, and also different episodes for kids. And that also, you can find me on Instagram, Trevor Biehn, all one word, and then our church also has an Instagram account as well, Jubilee Stratford.
Awesome. So check him out, follow him, be in touch with what he's doing. And Trevor, thank you so much for taking the time again today. Love you, man. Appreciate you.
I love you too, Sean. Thank you.
And thank you so much for all the listeners out there. Welcome again to another Supernatural Leadership Podcast episode. My name is Sean Gaby, your host. Though so thankful that you're part of this podcast family. Please, like I said, rate, review, write a comment, hit the like button, share this with your friends. And remember, you have a leader within. So let's make that leader a little more supernatural. Until next time.